The House will be in order. Pursuant to the order of the House of January 9, 2023, the Chair will now recognize members from the list submitted by the majority and minority leaders for morning hour debate. The Chair will alternate recognition between the parties with time equally allocated between the parties, and each member other than the majority and minority leaders and the minority whip limited to 5 minutes. But in no event shall debate continue beyond 1:50 p.m. The Chair recognizes the gentleman from Pennsylvania, Mr. Joyce, for 5 minutes.
Mr. Speaker, I rise to address the House and ask unanimous consent to revise and extend my remarks. Without objection. Mr. Speaker, I rise today to recognize the work of Fire Captain Kirk Mitchell and to thank him for his service to our country and to our community. From becoming a volunteer firefighter at the age of 16 to joining the United States Marine Corps at the age of 18, Kirk Mitchell set out early in life to care for those in need of help and to protect those who could not protect themselves. Kirk would go on to work as an EMT, a public safety instructor, and an emergency management officer. His extensive work took him from California to Puerto Rico to aid those who had been affected by wildfires and floods. Throughout all of his work, Captain Mitchell has maintained a connection with Blair County, Pennsylvania, serving as a steadfast member of the Altoona Fire Department. Kirk's commitment to protecting lives and supporting his fellow firefighters has been a hallmark of his wonderful career. And on behalf of Pennsylvania's 13th Congressional District, I wish Kirk every continued success. Thank you. Mr. Speaker, it was 34 years ago that the Iron Curtain finally fell, revealing to the world the horrible truths of socialism and providing a stark contrast between the United States and the enemies who wish to do us harm. In the Capitol Rotunda, we keep a warning to the dangers of socialism. A piece of the Berlin Wall is embedded in the base of the statue of President Ronald Reagan, who championed the work of ending socialism around the world. From Venezuela to the Soviet Union, from Fidel Castro in Cuba to Kim Jong-un in North Korea, every attempt to build a socialist or communist society has only led to ruin. Socialism is a tyranny that we can no longer afford to ignore. As this administration continues to pick winners and losers in our economy, and as President Biden continues to cancel debt for liberal elites on the backs of working Americans, it's time for us to clearly state that socialist policies have no place in our democracy. It is time for our country to return to the ideals of our founding fathers. Our country was built on the belief that we are all created with unalienable rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. These rights can only be fulfilled if we live in a nation that is truly free. We must condemn socialism in all of its forms. It was President Reagan who once said, "Freedom is never more than one generation away from extinction." We didn't pass it to our children in the bloodstream. It must be fought for and protected. We cannot afford to let our country be governed by socialist policies, and we must protect our freedoms. We must protect our liberties at all costs. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I yield.
For what reason does the gentleman from Guam rise? Okay. Chair recognizes the gentleman from Guam, Mr. Moylan, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I would like to take this time to remember and honor twin sisters, Katrina and Leslie. Their story is one of tragedy, as they both are resting with our Maker in heaven, and their memories have and shall continue to be shared with their loved ones. Katrina and Leslie were born with disabilities. As they were growing up, they required a caretaker to address their basic needs. These twins were lovable and stole the hearts of those they met. Katrina and Leslie were also emotionally strong. They wanted to be raised like other kids, but knew that their conditions were permanent and wouldn't be able to participate in sports, attend a prom, or get a job. They accepted the reality of their life, but they knew they had each other, and they had a loving family. The two were living in the state of Pennsylvania and received supplemental security income, SSI benefits, that helped their caretaker purchase necessities. Unfortunately, their caretaker, who was their mother, passed away unexpectedly. Leslie and Katrina once again found themselves enduring another unbearable hardship. Because of their conditions and the undertaking, it would require to care for not one, but two disabled individuals. The sisters were separated. Leslie stayed in the state of Pennsylvania and continued to receive SSI benefits. Katrina was taken in by her mom's sister, who is married to my childhood friend, Dr. John Fegiger. The couple brought her to Guam, and within 30 days of leaving Pennsylvania, Katrina lost her SSI benefits. Why, you may ask? Well, because of federal inequity, which denies American citizens who reside in most territories the rights to secure SSI benefits. The federal law strips away the financial benefits from American citizens with disabilities who relocate from a state to Guam, American Samoa, Virgin Islands, or Puerto Rico. We need to change this inequity. Why are U.S. citizens who reside in U.S. territories denied benefits they can attain if they were residing in a state? This is a real case of unfairness. Did you know that Guam has among the highest per capita numbers of enlisted members in the United States Armed Services throughout the nation? Yes, we too are proud Americans. There have been lawsuits to fix this inequity, and the courts, they have simply ruled that SSI benefits were created by Congress, and hence can be changed by Congress. So let's change it and do what is right. Katrina and Leslie are both no longer with us in the world today. In Leslie's final days, she said she sadly wouldn't be able to witness when this wrong would be made right. And while neither sister may be here, let us fix this inequity in their name and in the name of many others who have been denied this benefit just because they reside in a U.S. territory. I thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I yield back.
Recognizes the gentlewoman from North Carolina, Dr. Fox, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, thanks to House Republicans, regular order has been restored in the People's House. From expedited votes to open substantive debate on the merits of legislation that now take place on this very floor, the American people are seeing meaningful progress occur in real time. And it's so wonderful to see people in the gallery and in the halls of this Capitol. One-party rule in Washington had corrupted the legislative process for 2 years, and it failed every single American. Mr. Speaker, as part of House Republicans' commitment to America, we highlighted our plan to ensure a government that is accountable. Every day, we're acting upon that commitment and placing accountability and transparency at the feet of the American people. This is exactly what good government is all about. Our colleagues on the other side of the aisle should take note. I yield back, Mr. Speaker.
Chair recognizes the gentlewoman from Iowa, Dr. Miller Meeks, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today to recognize Iowa's former governor and ambassador to China, Terry Branstad, for being appointed as the president of the World Food Prize Foundation. Founded by Iowa's Dr. Norman E. Borlaug, the World Food Prize Foundation aims to improve food security around the world. Each year, leaders in the agricultural industry travel to Des Moines to discuss the latest global agricultural issues and recognize individuals who have made distinguished accomplishments in the industry. Governor Branstad played an integral role in creating the Iowa Hunger Summit during his time as Iowa's and the nation's longest-serving governor. The Iowa Hunger Summit has been instrumental in combating food insecurity in Iowa and around the world, in large part because of Governor Branstad's efforts. I'm excited to see how Governor Branstad will help the World Food Prize Foundation evolve, and I'm confident that his experience and background will help the foundation further its mission to eliminate world hunger. I can think of no better fit for the job. Congratulations, Governor Branstad. I'd also like to wish a happy birthday to Caroline Bender. Happy birthday, Caroline. Mr. Speaker, I yield back.
Pursuant to Clause 12A of Rule 1, the House declares the House in recess until 2 o'clock today.
The House will be in order. The prayer will be offered by Chaplain Kibben.
Would you pray with me? Holy God, hear the supplications of your people. We lay before you our greatest concerns, our innermost thoughts, and the whole of our hopes and fears. And when you hear us, forgive us for any doubt, any reluctance, any failure to believe that you will answer. Silence then all voices but your own. May the words in our heads and our hearts be quiet. We who speak for a living, who have devoted our lives to fixing what's broken and stepping in to right wrongs, are uncomfortable sitting back and waiting for your word. listening for your guidance. So when you do speak, when you make clear the direction you would have us go, the work you have called us to do, the lives you have designed us to live, may we be open to receive your divine direction, with ears to hear from even the most unlikely source, and eyes to see what you reveal from the viewpoint of your throne. And with the hearts open to the stirrings of your Holy Spirit, may we prove worthy of your attention and faithful in our response this day. In your sovereign and most gracious name we pray. Amen.
The chair has examined the journal of the last day's proceedings and announces to the House the approval thereof. Pursuant to Clause 1 of Rule 1, the journal stands approved. For what purpose does the gentleman from South Carolina seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, pursuant to Clause 1, Rule 1, I demand a vote on agreeing to the Speaker's approval of the journal.
The question is on agreeing to the Speaker's approval of the journal. Those in favor, please say aye. Those opposed, please say no.
Nay.
The ayes have it. The journal stands approved. For what purpose does the gentleman from South Carolina seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I object to the vote on the ground that a quorum is not present and make a point of order that a quorum is not present.
Pursuant to Clause 8 of Rule 20, further proceedings on this question are postponed. The Pledge of Allegiance will be led by the gentleman from Missouri, Mr. Alford.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
The chair will entertain requests for 1-minute speeches. For what purpose does the gentleman from South Carolina seek recognition? Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On Saturday, I was grateful to attend the campaign kickoff for Donald Trump at the South Carolina State House in Columbia with the former President and Governor Henry McMaster and Ambassador Ed McMullen. My public service has been committed to promoting job creation with the slogan of Joe Means Jobs. That is why I appreciate the success of Governor McMaster last year recruiting over $10 billion in investments. This enhances South Carolina as being first in the export of sales and of tires and passenger cars. The triumphant policies of President Trump reducing taxes and regulations created jobs. He created record unemployment lows for African Americans, Hispanics, Asian Americans, and women. Donald means jobs. A political consequence of the Trump and McMaster success is the supermajority of Republicans in the South Carolina State House and State Senate, with the most Republicans in over 150 years. Until 1961, there were no Republicans in the legislature in the 20th century. In conclusion, God bless our troops who successfully protected America for 20 years as the global war on terrorism continues moving from the Afghanistan safe haven to America. I yield back.
Thank you. For what purpose does the gentleman from Missouri seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I rise to address the House for 1 minute.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, today I rise to honor my Kansas City Chiefs for their AFC championship and their berth in Super Bowl 57. Like many Missourians, I could not be prouder of the effort put forth on the field yesterday, last night. Despite having an injured Patrick Mahomes, injuries to several key players, incredible amounts of outside noise, and the referees against them the entire game, the Chiefs made short work of the Bengals, and sent them off to the offseason. While I hope Eli Apple has fun in Cancun, I also hope that Mayor Jabroni and the rest of the Cincinnati fan base learned a valuable lesson last night. It is called Arrowhead. It is the loudest, toughest place to play in the NFL with the strongest fan base. A special thank you to Patrick Mahomes, Harrison Butker, Travis Kelce, Chris Jones, and of course, Joseph Asai for all their wonderful efforts last night. We couldn't have done it without you. And to the Philadelphia Eagles, we'll see you in Arizona. Go Chiefs! Mr. Speaker, I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Alford. Pursuant to Clause 12A of Rule 1, the chair declares the House in recess subject to the call of the chair.
Pursuant to Clause 8 of Rule 20, the Chair will postpone further proceedings today on motions to suspend the rules on which are recorded or the yeas and nays are ordered, or votes objected to under Clause 6 of Rule 20. The House will resume proceedings on postponed questions at a later time. For what purpose does the gentleman from Oklahoma seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I rise to move to suspend the rules and pass the bill H.R. 290, the Commercial Remote Sensing Amendment Act of 2023.
The clerk will report the title of the bill.
H.R. 290, a bill to provide for transparent licensing of commercial remote sensing systems and for other purposes.
Pursuant to the rule, the gentleman from Oklahoma, Mr. Lucas, and the gentlewoman from California, Ms. Lofgren, each will control 20 minutes. The Chair recognizes the gentleman from Oklahoma, Mr. Lucas.
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent that all members have 5 legislative days to revise and extend their remarks and to include extemporaneous material on H.R. 290, the bill now under consideration.
Without objection.
Mr. Speaker, I yield myself as much time as I might consume.
The gentleman is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise in support of H.R. 290, the Commercial Remote Sensing Act. I introduced this bipartisan legislation last Congress, and that measure passed the House by voice vote. I reintroduced the same bill this year along with my colleague, the ranking member, Lofgren. It updates the reporting requirements for NOAA's Office of Commercial Remote Sensing Regulatory Affairs so that Congress can monitor how regulations are impacting the growth and improvement of the commercial remote sensing industry. Remote sensing uses data collected from satellites to produce images of the Earth. It has become a critical resource for fields like agriculture, finance, trade, and energy. For instance, imagery and data from commercial remote sensing allows us to improve crop production by helping farmers more efficiently apply water and fertilizer. It informs the future commodity prices by actively monitoring weather and crop health. Commercial remote sensing also improves our ability to prepare for and respond to natural disasters by informing flood plain mapping, tornado tracking, and drought monitoring, topics that are very important to my constituents in Oklahoma. It can also be helpful in humanitarian relief efforts and monitoring treaty compliance, along with other applications. As you can see, commercial remote sensing provides us with critical information for many important applications. This technology is constantly evolving, and the industry is seeing tremendous growth. To effectively support and manage remote sensing activities, it's critical that Congress receive timely and comprehensive reports so that we can evaluate the state of the industry and how regulations are affecting this growth. The Commercial Space Launch Competitiveness Act of 2015 established a reporting requirement for the Department of Commerce on the status of commercial remote sensing, licensing, and regulation. This requirement expired in 2020. H.R. 290 will reinstate that reporting requirement and keep Congress informed of agency actions, their impact on licensees, and the state of commercial remote sensing industry. These reports to Congress will give us the information we need to ensure that the U.S. remains the global leader in this important field. Mr. Speaker, H.R. 290 is a no-nonsense bipartisan bill that will help ensure that the U.S. remains the global leader in commercial remote sensing industry. I want to thank Ranking Member Lofgren for joining me in advancing this legislation. I urge all of my colleagues to support this bill, and I reserve the balance of my time, Mr. Speaker.
The gentleman from Oklahoma reserves. The gentlewoman from California is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I yield myself as much time as I may consume. I rise today also in support of H.R. 290, the Commercial Remote Sensing Amendment Act of 2023. I'm pleased, as the chairman has said, to be an original co-sponsor of this legislation along with the chairman, and I'm pleased to serve as ranking member of the committee, a new assignment for me. It was all the way back in 1992 when Congress authorized the Secretary of Commerce to license and regulate commercial remote sensing space systems. Now, commercial remote sensing is now a vibrant and growing industry. Data and imagery from commercial remote sensing satellites are used widely, as the chairman has said, in agriculture, disaster monitoring, in energy, mapping, national security applications. In fact, commercial remote sensing has been an important information source for fighting the devastating western wildland fires, including those in my home state of California. Companies from around the world are launching commercial remote sensing systems and selling the data. According to the Satellite Industries Association, globally, these services reached an estimated $2.7 billion in revenue in 2021. Congress needs to ensure that the United States remains at the cutting edge of this industry, and that's why it's important that we have the transparency and insight we need to oversee the licensing and regulation of private remote sensing systems. In order to accomplish this, the Commercial Remote Sensing Amendment Act modifies the timeline for completing licenses to conform with updated regulations. It requires additional details on licensing information to be included on reports to Congress, and it extends a sunset clause for the annual report on commercial remote sensing licenses until 2030. As the chairman has mentioned, an identical version of this bill passed this House on suspension during the 117th Congress, and I'm pleased that Chairman Lucas and I can kick off our work this session by continuing the Science Committee's strong tradition of bipartisan work and our track record with this good bill. With that, I reserve the balance of my time, and I urge my colleagues to support the bill.
The gentlewoman from California reserves. The gentleman from Oklahoma is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I would note that I have no further speakers, and I reserve the balance of my time.
Well, I have no speakers either, so let me just close by saying I hope that we all support this good bill, and I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman from Oklahoma is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I yield myself my remaining time. As I have said previously, commercial remote sensing provides us with critical information related to a number of fields: agriculture, finance, trade, energy, and more. This, in turn, allows us to be better stewards of our resources. H.R. 290, the Commercial Remote Sensing Act, will help us ensure that Congress receives the updates necessary to monitor industrial regulations. By updating these reporting requirements, we can ensure that the U.S. remains the global leader in an important field. I urge my colleagues to support this legislation. I thank the ranking member for her help in this effort, and I yield back the balance of my time, Mr. Speaker.
The question is, will the House suspend the rules and pass the bill H.R. 290? Those in favor say aye. Those opposed say no. In the opinion of the chair, 2/3 being in the affirmative, the rules are suspended. The bill is passed, and without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid on the table. For what purpose does the gentleman from Oklahoma seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I move to suspend the rules and pass the bill H.R. 342, the Cost Share Accountability Act of 2023.
The clerk will report the title of the bill.
H.R. 342, a bill to amend the Energy Policy Act of 2005 to require reporting relating to certain cost-sharing requirements and for other purposes.
Pursuant to the rule, the gentleman from Oklahoma, Mr. Lucas, and the gentlewoman from California, Ms. Logren, will each control 20 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Oklahoma, Mr. Lucas.
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent that all members have 5 legislative days to revise and extend their remarks and to include extemporaneous material on H.R. 342, the bill now under consideration.
Without objection.
Mr. Speaker, I yield myself as much time as I might consume.
The gentleman is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise in support of H.R. 342, the Cost Share Accountability Act of 2023, introduced by my friend, Mr. Representative Obernolte. H.R. 342 is a good government bill that does exactly what it says it will do. It improves accountability. When making awards, the Department of Energy is subject to cost share requirements for most research, development, demonstration, and commercial application activities. DOE can modify or eliminate those requirements when necessary, an authority which has been critical to supporting and developing new technologies. This bill is very simple. It requires DOE to submit a quarterly report to Congress describing the instances where they have modified or waived those cost share requirements. The bill also makes those reports publicly available. H.R. 342 doesn't prevent DOE from waiving cost share requirements. It just ensures that those decisions are made public. This transparency and accountability is important because it allows us to ensure we're making the best possible use of taxpayers' resources. It's a smart, bipartisan policy, and I'd like to thank Representative Obernolte and Representative Foster for working on this legislation. And with that, I reserve the balance of my time, Mr. Speaker.
The gentleman from Oklahoma reserves. The gentlewoman from California is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I yield myself as much time as I may consume. I join the chairman today in supporting H.R. 342, the Cost Sharing Accountability Act of 2023. I'm pleased that today we're considering this bill. Many of the clean energy technologies deployed throughout the nation today have benefited from financial support from the Department of Energy. The bipartisan Cost Sharing Accountability Act of 2023 would strengthen the reporting requirements related to certain cost sharing requirements at DOE. Specifically, the bill would require the Secretary of Energy to report on the use of the statutory authority to reduce or eliminate cost-sharing requirements for research, for development, for demonstration, as well as commercial application activities. As the Chairman has noted, better reporting on financial assistance will help us to ensure that taxpayer dollars are being spent wisely. As mentioned, we passed a matching version of this bill under suspension of the rules in the last Congress. It's time, we hope, for the Senate to take this bill up and pass it this year after the House passes this again. And with that, I would reserve the balance of my time.
The gentlewoman from California reserves. The gentleman from Oklahoma is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I yield 5 minutes to the gentleman from California, Mr. Obernolte.
The gentleman is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise in strong support of my bill, H.R. 342, the Cost Sharing Accountability Act, and I thank my colleague, the gentleman from Oklahoma, Mr. Lucas, for yielding. Research and development grants in the field of energy administered by the Department of Energy play a critical role in innovation and energy research in the United States. The administration and awarding of those grants is governed by the Energy Policy Act of 2005. Among other things, that act requires the DOE to impose a cost share on the recipients of those grants. That cost share can be as low as 20% in the case of research and development grants, or as high as 50% in the case of commercialization and demonstration grants. The purpose of this cost share is simple. It's to ensure that the grant recipients also have some skin in the game when it comes to ensuring the success of the grants and the projects that they are bidding on and demonstrating. Several months ago, the Investigations and Oversight Subcommittee of the Science, Space, and Technology House Committee held an oversight hearing in which we investigated the occasions on which the Department of Energy had waived those cost-sharing requirements on grants that it had awarded. The DOE has the statutory ability to waive those grants, those cost shares, under the appropriate circumstances. We wanted to make sure that that authority was being exercised judiciously. Although we found that the DOE was appropriately waiving those cost shares under those circumstances, we were very surprised by the lack of transparency in that process, and equally surprised by the difficulty with which the subcommittee had in acquiring the information about how often the DOE was waiving those cost shares. This bill, H.R. 342, is a very simple solution to that problem. It will require the DOE to make quarterly reports to the committees of jurisdiction in both the House and the Senate on the occasions and the circumstances under which it waives cost share requirements for the grants that it awards. This will enhance Congress's ability to exercise oversight over the DOE, but equally importantly, it will impose greater transparency into this process for the parties that apply for these grants, and it will demonstrate the circumstances under which the DOE would consider waiving those cost share requirements. Mr. Speaker, this is basic good governance. It's an oversight bill. I hope it's something that we all on both sides of the aisle can support, and I would like to thank my co-sponsor, the gentleman from Illinois, Mr. Foster, for his leadership on this issue. I urge adoption of H.R. 342. I yield back.
The gentleman from Oklahoma reserves. The gentlewoman from California is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I want to thank my colleague from California, Mr. Obernolte, for introducing this bill. And as he's mentioned, we are joined by his co-sponsor of this bill, the gentleman from Illinois, and last year's chair of the Oversight Subcommittee, Mr. Foster, who I will recognize for 2 minutes.
The gentleman is recognized.
And thank you, Mr. Speaker and Ranking Member Lofgren. I rise in support of H.R. 342, the Cost Share Accountability Act. This bill, which I co-led with its sponsor, Congressman Obernolte, was born out of a joint hearing that we held last Congress, which discussed best practices for financial assistance agreements within the Department of Energy's Office of Nuclear Energy. This bill mandates reports on the department's use of cost-sharing practices, which require organizations receiving grants from the Department of Energy to fund a portion of the project's cost. I'm a big fan of cost-sharing agreements as a mechanism to make sure that taxpayer dollars are well spent, and there are circumstances under which they may appropriately be waived. But in order for Congress to fulfill our oversight responsibilities, we must be able to access information on how those requirements are being implemented and when they're being waived. This legislation is fundamental good governance, an important step to increase the transparency of the Department of Energy's funding practices, and I look forward to working with the Department of Energy to ensure that cost sharing is implemented fairly and effectively and that it is supporting the Department's and Congress's priorities. I'd also like to thank Representative Obernolte for his leadership of this legislation, which passed the House in a strong bipartisan vote last Congress, and also for his service as ranking member of the Science Subcommittee that I chaired last Congress. I urge my colleagues to again support this legislation and yield back.
The gentleman reserves. The gentleman from Oklahoma is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I have no further speakers, and I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentlewoman from California is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, we have no additional speakers either, so let me just close by urging everyone to support this good bill, and let's celebrate carrying on the fine tradition of bipartisan legislative action in the Science Committee. I look forward to the rest of this Congress, and I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentlewoman yields back. The gentleman from Oklahoma is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I yield myself the remainder of my time to close. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. H.R. 342 will create more transparency around the DOE awards and help us better oversee our investments in cutting-edge energy technologies. It's a bipartisan, common-sense legislation, which is why it passed the House on suspension last year. I urge my colleagues to support this bill once again, and I yield back the balance of my time, Mr. Speaker.
The gentleman yields. The question is, will the House suspend the rules and pass the bill H.R. 342? Those in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. In the opinion of the chair, two-thirds being in the affirmative, the rules are suspended, the bill is passed. And without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid on the table. For what purpose does the gentleman from North Carolina seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I move to suspend the rules and pass the bill H.R. 500, the Financial Exploitation Prevention Act of 2023.
The clerk will report the title of the bill.
H.R. 500, a bill to amend the Investment Company Act of 1940 to postpone the date of payment or satisfaction upon redemption of certain securities in the case of the financial exploitation of specified adults and for other purposes.
Pursuant to the rule, the gentleman from North Carolina, Mr. McHenry, and the gentlewoman from California, Ms. Waters, each will control 20 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentleman from North Carolina.
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent that all members may have 5 legislative days in which to revise and extend their remarks and exclude extraneous material on this bill.
Without objection.
Mr. Speaker, I yield myself such time as I may consume.
The gentleman is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I rise in support of H.R. 500, the Financial Exploitation Prevention Act, a bipartisan bill that will help combat the financial exploitation of our seniors and other vulnerable adults. I'd like to thank the gentlewoman from Missouri, the new chair of the Subcommittee on Capital Markets, Mrs. Wagner, for her work on this bill. Financial exploitation, particularly of seniors and other vulnerable adults, is a serious and growing issue. Consider this. The number of Americans aged 65 and older is projected to nearly double from 52 million in 2018 to 95 million by 2060. At the same time, the 65 and older age group's share of the total population is predicted to rise from 16% to 23%. Right now, approximately 44% of households headed by a baby boomer and 30% of silent and GI generation households own mutual funds. As more and more investors transition into retirement, the risk of financial exploitation for older households will only increase. Right now, roughly 1 in 5 senior investors already fall prey to fraudsters, losing an estimated $2.9 billion annually. And that's just the cases we know about. Unfortunately, there is research that shows only 1 in 44 cases of financial abuse is ever reported. This bill provides a tool to fight against this type of elder abuse. Some mutual fund shareholders' accounts are held directly with the mutual fund and serviced by the fund's transfer agent, otherwise known as Director at Funds accounts. The transfer agent is typically responsible for opening and servicing the accounts, managing account records, and serving as the fund's point of contact with those shareholders. Under current law, when a funds transfer agent suspects financial exploitation in a director of funds account, it cannot lawfully delay the disbursement or redemption proceeds while an investigation occurs. This bill would codify a 2018 Securities and Exchange Commission issued no-action letter that permits a mutual fund and its transfer agent to delay the redemption period of a security if it is reasonably believed that a request was made by exploited seniors or other vulnerable adults. In many cases, this work is done by financial firms using technology. That technology is widely available across financial platforms, and this is enabling that technology to flag a question and give pause to the movement of funds, thereby protecting the seniors' accounts. Now, in codifying this Securities and Exchange Commission no-action letter, this will provide our potentially at-risk investors with the protection they need to make sure they can receive the hard-earned savings that they have built up over the years. This is an important bill. It takes the existing practice from the Securities and Exchange Commission and makes it law, gives it a stronger force of protection for our seniors. It is a bipartisan bill, and I'm very proud that this is the first bill reported out of the House Financial Services Committee, and it has bipartisan support. So, Mr. Speaker, I urge the adoption and support of this bill, and I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman from North Carolina reserves. The gentlewoman from California is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I yield myself such time as I may consume. I rise in support of H.R. 500, the Financial Exploitation Prevention Act of 2023, sponsored by the gentlewoman from Missouri, Mrs. Wagner. Adults over the age of 65 are too often the target of financial exploitation and have become victims of financial crimes more than any other demographic. In the annual report on elder fraud and abuse, the Department of Justice reported that in 2020 alone, seniors suffered over $1 billion in financial losses due to fraud. And unlike other adults, seniors are often dependent on their savings to support them in retirement, making it much more difficult for them to recover from incidents of fraud. Brokers and investment managers, who often stand in as the stewards of the savings of seniors, are in a unique position to protect elders from financial crimes. In 2018, Securities and Exchange Commission released a report, a letter called a no-action letter, stating that the Commission would not take an enforcement action against the agents of an investment company, including mutual funds, if the person passed a payment or redemption based on the suspicion of financial exploitation. This pause on cashing out the savings of a senior provides a necessary safeguard to ensure that the redemption is consistent with the will of the senior. H.R. 500 would codify this SEC letter. It would also make 2 further changes to describe how a mutual fund advisor can establish the process at each fund to protect seniors. So I would like to thank Ms. Wagner for working with my staff to craft the language in this bill. This is a helpful piece of legislation that will provide one more tool to market participants to protect investors, and in particular, our nation's retirees. This legislation passed with bipartisan support last Congress, and I urge my colleagues to once again support this bill, and I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentlewoman from California reserves. The gentleman from North Carolina is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. At this time, I'd like to yield such time as she may consume to the Chair of the Capital Markets Subcommittee on the Financial Services Committee, the gentlelady from Missouri, Mrs. Wagner.
So recognized.
I'm sorry, Missouri.
So recognized.
I thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I rise in support of my bill, H.R. 500, the Financial Exploitation Prevention Act. It is indeed a bipartisan bill that will help prevent seniors and other vulnerable adults from becoming victims of fraud. I'd like to thank Chairman McHenry for his very strong support on this important legislation, and for the ranking member for working with us on this legislation. Financial exploitation of seniors and other vulnerable adults is a serious and growing problem. Over the next 10+ years, 10,000 Americans will turn 65 every day, with seniors making up 18% of the nation's population by 2030. As more investors age into retirement, their risk of exploitation increases. Sadly, about 1 in 5 senior investors falls prey to financial fraud, and those investors lose an estimated $2.9 billion annually in reported cases. However, according to the National Adult Protective Services Association, only 1 in 44 cases of financial abuse is ever even reported. And right now, approximately 44% of households headed by a baby boomer and 30% of silent generation households own mutual funds. My bill proposes a solution to fight elder abuse in the context of mutual funds. Since some mutual fund shareholder accounts are held directly with the mutual fund and serviced by the fund's transfer agent, or direct at fund accounts as they are known, the transfer agent is typically responsible for opening and servicing the accounts, maintaining the account records, and serving as the fund's point of contact for those shareholders. Under current law, when a fund's transfer agent suspects financial exploitation in a directed fund account, it cannot lawfully delay the disbursement of redemption proceeds while an investigation occurs. My legislation would codify both a FINRA and SEC issued no action letter from 2018 that permits a mutual fund and its transfer agent to delay the redemption period of a security if they reasonably believe that a request was made by exploiting seniors or other vulnerable adults. It does not stop this trade from going through. It just takes a pause while they check with that senior to make sure that there has not been fraud or elder abuse anticipated. This will provide our potentially vulnerable investors with an important layer of investor protection to help make sure that they receive the hard-earned savings that they have built up over the years. Additionally, and importantly, my bill also requires the SEC to report to Congress on additional potential legislative solutions on further combating financial exploitation of seniors and vulnerable adults. So many of us have had the bittersweet experience of caring for a parent or loved one as they grow older. This legislation will give our constituents the peace of knowing that their loved ones are better protected from fraud, and I strongly urge my colleagues to support the Financial Exploitation Prevention Act, and I yield back.
The gentlelady yields. Gentleman from North Carolina reserves. The gentlelady from California is recognized.
I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentlelady from California reserves. The gentleman from North Carolina.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to recognize the gentleman from New York, the newest member of the House Financial Services Committee, Mr. Lawler, for 90 seconds.
So recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Today I rise to speak in support of H.R. 500, the Financial Exploitation Act of 2023. I want to thank my colleague, the gentlewoman from Missouri, for introducing this legislation. Too often, our offices receive desperate calls from seniors who have been exploited by scammers who coerce them into making bad or risky investments and cost them all or most of their life savings. These calls are especially heartbreaking, as our seniors are the ones who have sacrificed so much to build our country into the incredible nation that it is today. That's why the Financial Exploitation Act codifies a process by which seniors and those vulnerable adults in our country are given a tool they can use to fight back: time. By delaying the transfer of funds and verifying that the true will of the account holder is being exercised, we can hopefully prevent more of these tragic calls and circumstances from happening in the first place. As my colleague pointed out, $2.9 billion a year in fraud perpetrated upon our seniors. I urge the Senate to join us in passing this common sense legislation into law to protect our seniors and our most vulnerable residents across our country. I yield back my time.
The gentleman yields. The gentleman from North Carolina reserves. The gentlelady from California is recognized.
I continue to reserve my time.
Gentlelady reserves.
I'm prepared to close, and I defer to the ranking member if she has any final statements.
The gentlelady from California is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I yield myself the balance of the time. H.R. 500 is a helpful piece of legislation that will support our nation's seniors as they seek to fund their retirement. Investment advisors and brokers want to do the right thing to stop fraud when they see it, and this bill will ensure they're able to do so. The bill is supported by the Consumer Federation of America, North American Securities Advisors Association, and Public Citizen. I urge all members to support this bill, and I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentlelady from California yields. The gentleman from North Carolina is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd say to the Mr. Speaker, I said to the ranking member that I was prepared to close. We have a member that just arrived, and I'm going to allow her to have the closing statement here. But I do want to thank the ranking member. Mr. Speaker, I want to thank the ranking member and her staff working with the Republican staff of the House Financial Services Committee to be able to move these first pieces of legislation. We have 3 bills that are on the suspension calendar this evening. They are bipartisan bills. One has a primary sponsor by a Democrat, 2 with a primary sponsor by Republicans, but all are bipartisan, and I want to thank the ranking member for her willingness to work across the aisle to move bipartisan legislation. In doing this, I recall the beginning of the last Congress 2 years ago and 2 years before that, where she reached out to then Republicans in the minority and offered us the same thing. And so I'm grateful for that outreach 2 and 4 years ago, and I've extended the same hand to you, and you have likewise extended the same hand to me. And Mr. Speaker, I'm very grateful for the leadership of the ranking member and her willingness to work with us. With that, I'd like to yield the balance of the time to Ms. Houchin, Mrs. Houchin from the great state of Indiana, a new member of the House Financial Services Committee.
Gentlelady is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good afternoon. I rise today in support of the Financial Exploitation Prevention Act, a bill I'm proud to be a co-sponsor. Everyday seniors and other vulnerable adults become targets of financial fraud. While not all of the cases are known or discovered, about 1 in 5 senior investors in the United States are victims of financial scams. In 2021 alone, there were over 1,500 reported cases of financial fraud against Hoosier seniors. This is unacceptable. As a member of the House Financial Services Committee, this is exactly the type of legislation my constituents sent me here to support. That's why today I will be voting yes on this important bill to keep our seniors' pocketbooks safe. I hope all my colleagues will join me in doing the same. Thank you, and I yield the balance of my time.
The gentleman from North Carolina is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I urge the adoption of this bill, and I yield back the balance of my time.
The question is, will the House suspend the rules and pass the bill H.R. 500? Those in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. In the opinion of the chair, 2/3 being in the affirmative.
And, Mr. Speaker, on that, I request the yeas and nays.
The yeas and nays are requested. All those in favor of taking this vote of yeas and nays will rise and remain standing until continued. A sufficient number have risen. The yeas and nays are ordered pursuant to Clause 8 of Rule 20. Further proceedings on this question will be postponed. For what purpose does the gentleman from North Carolina seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I move to suspend the rules and pass the bill H.R. 582, the Credit Union Board Modernization Act of 2023.
The clerk will report the title of the bill.
H.R. 582, a bill to amend the Federal Credit Union Act to modify the frequency of Board of Directors meetings and for other purposes.
Pursuant to the rule, the gentleman from North Carolina, Mr. McHenry, and the gentlewoman from California, Ms. Waters, each will control 20 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentleman from North Carolina.
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent that all members may have 5 legislative days in which to revise and extend their remarks and exclude extraneous material on this bill.
Without objection.
Mr. Speaker, I yield myself such time as I may consume.
The gentleman is recognized.
I rise in support of H.R. 582, the Credit Union Board Modernization Act. Every day, consumers in each of our districts rely on their local credit union to help them with things like securing a loan, to buying a home, saving for retirement, or even financing tuition. This means that credit unions need to spend their time working with their members, not wasting valuable resources and staff time checking the box on monthly meetings that may not be necessary. This bill allows credit unions to do that important work. By updating the Federal Credit Union Act to reduce the frequency of required board meetings, certain federal credit unions will have greater flexibility in meeting requirements. At the same time, the safety and soundness of the financial system will be protected. Currently, federal credit union boards are required to meet at least once per month. Under the bill's new requirements, federal credit unions with a composite CAMELS rating of 1 or 2 will be required to meet at least 6 times annually, with at least 1 meeting held during each fiscal quarter. All right, what does that mean? It means entities with the strongest performance and risk management practices will be rewarded. That means instead of checking the box on those monthly meetings, if they are of high quality performance and risk management, they'll be relieved of some of those burdens. To be clear, this is not a one-size-fits-all mandate. There's nothing in the bill that prevents those credit union boards from meeting each month or even more often if needed, and they do. In times of financial stress, these boards meet quite frequently to assess risk and to protect their members' nest eggs. This bill also acknowledges that new or poor performing credit unions may require more regular meetings to ensure that they can provide the level of service their communities deserve. This legislation continues to require monthly meetings for new federal credit unions during the first 5 years of existence. In addition, credit unions with a composite CAMELS rating of 3, 4, or 5 must continue to meet once a month. These are the credit unions that need to improve performance and risk management practices to ensure the safety and soundness of our financial system. I'll finish with this. This bill is a good illustration of how members can come together to create bipartisan legislation to modernize outdated practices and policies for the benefit of our community's financial institutions and for their members. I want to commend my colleague, Mr. Huizenga, the subcommittee chair for oversight, the gentleman from Michigan, for his good work last Congress and this Congress on this bill, and a bipartisan bill indeed this is. And so with that, I reserve the balance of my time and urge my colleagues' adoption and support of this bill.
The gentleman from North Carolina reserves. The gentlewoman from California is recognized.
Thank you very much. I yield myself such time as I may consume. I rise in support of H.R. 582, the Credit Union Board Modernization Act, sponsored by Representative Vargas. This bill would modernize federal requirements for federal credit union board meetings to match a flexibility included in state credit union charter requirements in 17 states, including my state of California. Specifically, federal credit unions are currently required to meet monthly. Under this bill, federal credit unions that receive high ratings from the regulator would only be required to meet 6 times annually, with at least one meeting held during each fiscal quarter. To ensure stability and mitigate the risk of institutional failure, this bill retains certain safeguards. For example, federal credit unions that receive low exam ratings would still be required to meet at least monthly, as well as newly formed credit unions, federal credit union boards during the first 5 years of the charter. Additionally, if emergencies or issues arise requiring a board meeting, nothing in the bill prevents federal credit unions from meeting more frequently than what is required. I urge my colleagues to support this bill, and I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentlewoman from California reserves. The gentleman from North Carolina is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And this time I'd like to yield to the Oversight Chair of the Financial Services Committee, Mr. Huizenga, for as much time as he may consume.
The gentleman is recognized.
The bill's sponsor.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you to Chairman McHenry for yielding me time this afternoon. I rise today in support of the Credit Union Board Modernization Act and ask for its immediate passage. Credit unions can play an important role in many of our local communities, often working with families and small business owners to gain access to credit. H.R. 582 will go a long way to providing reasonable regulatory relief for credit unions, especially in Michigan's 4th Congressional District and across the nation. Mr. Speaker, if signed into law, these common-sense reasonable reforms will allow federally chartered credit unions in good standing in Michigan and states across the country the same reasonable governance practices afforded to those at the state level. Currently, all federally chartered credit union boards must meet at least once a month. This one-size-fits-all requirement often negatively impacts smaller rural credit unions, which ultimately impacts, frankly, which members are willing to even serve on those boards, and therefore the services that they can and will be able to provide to their local community. The Credit Union Board Modernization Act rightly modernizes how often federally chartered credit union boards must meet, which the National Credit Union Administration currently mandates to be monthly. Nothing in this legislation prevents a credit union from meeting more than 6 times a year. It just gives them the flexibility, and they are able to then decide. That is the idea of a credit union. Member-driven, they will decide. So, Mr. Speaker, I'd like to thank the sponsor of this bill, the gentleman from California, Mr. Vargas, for working with the Republicans, and specifically me, this last Congress, to implement these reasonable safeguards. Specifically, this legislation does, I should note, specifically, this legislation does not apply to new credit unions or those credit unions with low exam ratings, as the chair had indicated. And highly rated credit unions with high management ratings must hold at least 6 meetings annually, with at least 1 meeting held during each fiscal quarter. So alternatively, again, these lower rated credit unions must continue to meet once a month, and there will be direction on that, so as the chair has outlined. So I want to be clear, this bill does not give credit unions an advantage over their bank or credit or community banks counterparts, but brings parity to an outdated process. So again, I want to thank Congressman Vargas for his commitment to make this a bipartisan effort. I look forward to seeing these reforms, which will strengthen local economies across the nation, have them enacted into law. And with that, I yield back to the chair.
Gentleman yields. The member from North Carolina reserves. The gentlelady from California is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I have no further speakers, and I'm prepared to close if the gentleman from North Carolina has no further speakers. Thank you.
The gentlelady from California is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I yield myself the balance of the time. I applaud Mr. Vargas's efforts to work on this bipartisan bill and appreciate that the reforms in this bill have been structured in a way to incentivize credit union boards to take steps to ensure their institutions are safe and sound and well managed. This bill has broad support, including from credit unions like the California and Nevada credit union leagues, to consumer groups like Americans for Financial Reform, and I'm pleased to work with Mr. Vargas to advance this bill through the House. I was pleased to do this in the last Congress, and I again urge my colleagues to support this bill, and I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentlewoman from California reserves. The gentleman from North Carolina is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I'm prepared to close. Look, this is the case on the House Financial Services Committee. When we see a challenge that has a common sense solution, we try to tackle it, and we try to tackle it in a bipartisan way. And I want to concur with Mr. Huizenga in his praise of Mr. Vargas. This was a bipartisan bill between Mr. Vargas and Mr. Huizenga last Congress, and it continues to be a bipartisan bill this Congress. And so I want to thank my colleague, Mr. Vargas, for offering it. And I do want to thank the ranking member for working with me and with my team to bring these 3 bipartisan bills before the full House in the opening month of Congress. And with that, I urge this bill's adoption, and I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman from North Carolina yields. The question is, will the House suspend the rules and pass the bill H.R. 582? Those in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. In the opinion of the chair, 2/3 being in the affirmative, the rules are suspended, the bill is passed. And without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid on the table. For what purpose does the gentleman from North Carolina seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I move to suspend the rules and pass the bill H.R. 298, the Expanding Access to Capital for Rural Job Creators Act.
The clerk will report the title of the bill.
H.R. 298, a bill to amend the Securities Exchange Act of 1934 to expand access to capital for rural area small businesses and for other purposes.
Pursuant to the rule, the gentleman from North Carolina, Mr. McHenry, and the gentlewoman from California, Ms. Walters, will each control 20 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentleman from North Carolina.
Ask unanimous consent that all members may have 5 legislative days in which to revise and extend their remarks and exclude extraneous material on this bill.
Without objection.
Mr. Speaker, I yield myself such time as I may consume, and I rise in strong support of H.R. 298, the Expanding Access to the Expanding Access to Capital for Rural Job Creators Act. I would like to first thank Congressman Mooney and my colleagues on the other side of the aisle for their work on this issue, last Congress and this Congress. In the Financial Services Committee, we continually highlight the importance of capital formation for entrepreneurs and job creators in underbanked rural communities. That means their ability to get a loan, their ability to get investment capital. We want to enhance every American's ability to get access to capital to take their ideas to market. I can speak from experience about the struggles of emerging entrepreneurs, what they face when starting or growing their own small business. My father started a business in our backyard, mowing grass for other people. He and his buddy both had 5 kids. I'm the youngest of 5 kids. My dad's business partner had 5 kids, so he had plenty of free labor. What they didn't have access to was capital or investment capital. And so his first piece of lending was done because he had a Toro, which was the best lawnmower you could get at the time, a Toro salesperson who so wanted to make the sale that he let him use the equipment until my father and his business partner could get paid from the hospital where they're mowing the grass. And that was the first piece of equipment they got because the sales guy wanted to make the sale. The second piece of equipment they got was a truck to put that lawnmower in the back of that they got using a MasterCharge, which is now MasterCard. They used a credit card to buy a truck, and they put a rope around this very expensive riding lawnmower in the back of this beat-up pickup truck. And that was the dream for both families that put 5 kids through college. Both families, 5 kids, 10 kids total, put through college. And now my brother runs that business that my father started in our backyard. The question of access to capital, if you don't have friends that have personal wealth, is very difficult in this country. And it's in rural communities, it's in urban communities. We have areas of this country that are underbanked and resource-starved. It doesn't mean that they have less good ideas because of where they're born. They don't. That is not connected with this. They are starved for capital. What we need to do in a bipartisan way, and what we have had conversations with in a bipartisan way on our committee, is how to fix that problem. And we're trying, because we have communities across this country that are being left behind, and that's completely unacceptable. So this is a bipartisan bill that tries to get at that and help small businesses that are vulnerable in rural communities. Research shows that after the last financial crisis, small businesses and startups were less likely to form in rural areas than in urban areas. Now, these same small businesses are facing record inflation and supply chain disruptions. In recent years, the SEC's, the Securities and Exchange Commission's Small Business Advocate found that rural businesses that seek investor capital are raising higher amounts. However, rural businesses are still raising less capital than their urban counterparts relative to the size of the effective population. But even the urban numbers misrepresent what is happening in urban areas in this country. Because just because a big business is headquartered in an urban area doesn't mean they're serving the urban area or that they're employing in that urban area. So we've got huge challenges. In rural areas, which this bill deals with, every small business and entrepreneur counts, and they are the lifeblood of the local economy, and their success is critical to the success of their community. This bill is just one example of how Congress can help solve one of the issues that rural small businesses face: access to capital. I would like to thank Congressman Mooney for his work on this bill, and I urge my colleagues to support this bipartisan legislation, and I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman from North Carolina reserves. The gentlewoman from California is recognized.
Thank you. I yield myself such time as I may consume. I
The
rise
gentlewoman
in
is
support of
recognized.
H.R. 298, the Expanding Access to Capital for Rural Job Creators Act, sponsored by Representative Mooney of West Virginia. Last Congress, this bill was led by Democrats and introduced by my good friend, former Representative Axney of Iowa. The bill passed the House last year, and I continue to support it. While small businesses in the big cities may enjoy easier access to capital to grow their businesses, hire and support their employees, and serve their communities, the businesses in rural America often struggle. Rural America's job growth is half the rate than that of big cities, and rural America's poverty rate is also higher than that of the big cities, even though it has dropped under President Biden's leadership and as a result of the Inflation Reduction Act passed by Democrats last Congress. To better understand these issues in rural America, H.R. 298 would require the SEC's Small Business Advocate to report to Congress on particular challenges that rural businesses face in accessing our capital markets. And so I am very much in support of this bill, and I've always advocated that we should work together, the rural legislators and the small town legislators, to be able to do more in rural communities. And of course, it takes resources. And so, while my colleagues on the opposite side of the aisle may be in the cutting mode based on what I'm learning about the debt limits discussions that are going on, I would urge them to take a look at these rural communities so that we can begin to close that gap that exists. And I want to say to my colleagues, it is not only when we're talking about businesses and small businesses, whether we're talking about that or health care or any of the other issues. The rural communities need more advocacy, they need more legislation, they need more of the representatives on the opposite side of the aisle dealing with us so that we can correct these gaps that have lasted for far too long. And so I urge my colleagues to support this bill, and I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentlewoman from California reserves. The gentleman from North Carolina is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I agree with the words of the ranking member. And at this time, I'd like to yield the balance of my time to the Vice Chair of the Financial Services Committee and the Chair of the Digital Assets Subcommittee, Mr. Hill of Arkansas.
Gentleman is recognized.
I thank the Speaker, and I certainly thank the Chairman of the Financial Services Committee, and I thank the ranking member in the 118th Congress, Mrs. Waters, for her work on this bipartisan bill, H.R. 298, expanding access to capital for Rural Job Creators Act, sponsored by Alex Mooney, our member from West Virginia, certainly a very rural place. Mountainous, tough to get around, a lot like Arkansas. And small businesses, as the chairman said, are the backbone of the economy in Arkansas, as they are across the country. Almost 50% of jobs in this nation are with traditional small businesses. And yet they face obstacles in getting capital they need to grow and create jobs under the best of circumstances in Los Angeles or in Charlotte, the financial capital of the East. These greater challenges are really tough when you get out in the country. And in Arkansas, that is almost all but 2 counties in our state are deeply rural. I was a bank president in a town of 100 people in a county of 7,000, and you talk about capital needs, that was certainly the case. And it's why I support this wholly bipartisan legislation that would direct the Securities and Exchange Commission Office of Advocacy for Small Business Capital Formation to study the problems faced by those small business entrepreneurs, owners, family businesses that want to access capital to grow. This bill has passed this House last July with bipartisan support, and it should do it again today. It sends a message that Congress is fighting to help our small businesses out in rural areas. It's critical. We want them to thrive. And sadly, this Securities and Exchange Commission and its chairman, Gary Gensler, don't have this as a priority, Mr. Speaker. Their priority is not helping capital formation or helping small businesses thrive. In fact, they're trying to choke it off with their regulatory burden. So I'm glad to see that Congress is weighing in to say this is important. Our young people in rural communities are also facing an additional crisis, which is how do we create opportunities for high school students in rural counties that can't afford a 4-year college degree or don't want to saddle themselves with debt. And that means creating a path to pursue a skilled trade, something that's in desperate need in all of our counties, urban and rural. Workforce education must go hand in hand with helping small capitals get the capital to grow. Entrepreneurs have to have the investment, but they've also got to have a skilled workforce to help them grow their company and expand for other people. So I want to say I'm fully in support of this bill because I think it speaks to the heart of the vast majority of our country, which are small companies working in rural areas. And I agree with the ranking member when she says that they need investment in health care and other things in rural areas. And that's why in my state there are 172 community health centers, federal community health centers spread across our entire state. And we have a really capable, good local hospital system throughout our rural counties. And we're blessed by that. And we're blessed by good CTE schools, classic trade workforce schools, but we could use more. And of course, we've got to have capital to grow, and it can't just come from the banking sector. And that's why I support so fully our chair's emphasis on crowdsourcing funding for small businesses. Think how much more straightforward that is in a rural area to try to do something good by bringing together people from all over, all walks of life to help somebody build a business. So I thank the chair for his leadership. I thank the ranking member. I urge all our colleagues to support this bill, and I yield back to the chair.
The gentleman yields. The gentleman from North Carolina reserves. The gentlewoman from California is recognized.
I have no further speakers, and I'm prepared to close if the gentleman from North Carolina has no further speakers.
The gentlelady from California is recognized.
Thank you. Mr. Speaker, H.R. 298 directs the SEC Small Business Advocate to focus on the challenges rural small businesses face. I again urge my colleagues to support this bill. Again, I'd like to reiterate how anxious I am to work with the opposite side of the aisle so that we could close this gap and deal with the concerns of rural America. It is not only in small business, again, it is healthcare and it is in housing. And you all know that housing is one of my top priorities. I'm looking forward to a urban-rural renaissance of some kind. And I want to say to Mr. Hill, I'm looking forward to what can be done in Arkansas. My mother was born in Cotton Plant, Arkansas, in his district. And I know that there are a lot of needs there, but it's going to cost money, it's going to cost time, and I want you to know I believe in capital formation, and I think we can work together on capital formation. So with that, I urge my colleagues to support this bill, and I yield back the balance of my time.
From North Carolina is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I yield myself the remainder of my time. Mr. Speaker, I want to thank the ranking member for her words and comments here. It is true. We've worked together on capital formation initiatives in previous Congresses, and I would hope that we'll be able to do the same. But I know of her upbringing in Missouri and her career in California. She has both rural and urban experiences that she can bring to this, and I likewise have mainly rural upbringing to bring to this, but I think together we can craft a smart agenda to address the needs of the American people, and that is my intention. With a focus on capital formation in across the country, with the needs of a modern economy to digitize so many of our processes in the world of financial services, and the need to give architecture to a new range of assets that are in the financial services world around cryptocurrency and digital assets. There's a lot that is happening here that we have to embrace and allow that prosperity to be spread across the country. And working together, I think we can do that. And so with that, I would urge adoption of this piece of legislation, and I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman from North Carolina yields. The question is, will the House suspend the rules and pass the bill H.R. 298? Those in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. In the opinion of the chair, 2/3 being in the affirmative, the rules are suspended, the bill is passed, and without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid on the table. Pursuant to Clause 12A of Rule 1, the chair declares the House in recess until approximately 6:30 p.m. today.
The House will be in order. Proceedings will resume on question previously postponed. Votes will be taken in the following order. Motion to suspend the rules and pass H.R. 500, and agreeing to the Speaker's approval of the Journal if ordered. The first electronic vote will be conducted as a 15-minute vote. Pursuant to Clause 9 of Rule 20, remaining electronic votes will be conducted as 5-minute votes. Pursuant to Class 8 of Rule 20, the unfinished business is the vote on motion on the gentleman from North Carolina, Mr. McHenry, to suspend the rules and pass H.R. 500, on which the yeas and nays are ordered. The clerk will report the title.
H.R. 500, a bill to amend the Investment Company Act of 1940 to postpone the date of payment or satisfaction upon redemption of certain securities in the case of the financial exploitation of specified adults and for other purposes.
The question is, will the House suspend the rules and pass the bill? Members will record their votes by electronic device. This is a 15-minute vote. On this vote, the yeas are 419 and the nays are 0. 2/3 being in the affirmative, the rules are suspended, the bill is passed, and without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid on the table. Pursuant to Clause 8 of Rule 20, the unfinished business is the question on agreeing to the Speaker's approval of the journal, which the Chair will put to no vote. The question is on agreeing to the Speaker's approval of the journal. Those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed say no. In the opinion of the Chair, the ayes have it, and the journal stands approved. For what purpose does the gentlewoman from New York seek recognition?
By direction of the House Republican Conference, I send to the desk a privileged resolution and ask for its immediate consideration.
Clerk? The clerk will report the resolution.
House Resolution 70.
I ask unanimous consent to dispense with the reading.
Without objection, the resolution is agreed to, and the motion to reconsider is laid on the table. What purpose does the gentleman from California seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, by direction of the Democratic Caucus, I offer a privileged resolution and ask for its immediate consideration.
The clerk will report the resolution.
House Resolution 71. Resolved that the following named members be and are hereby
Mr.
elected.
Speaker, I ask unanimous consent that the resolution be considered as read.
Without objection, the resolution is agreed to, and the motion to reconsider is laid on the table. The Chair announces the Speaker's appointment pursuant to 22 U.S.C. 1928A and the order of the House of January 9, 2023, of the following members on the part of the House of the United States Group of the NATO Parliamentary Assembly.
Of Kentucky, Mr. Dunn of Florida, Mr. Bergman of Michigan, Mrs. Wagner of Missouri, Mr. Fitzpatrick of Pennsylvania, Mr. McCormick of Georgia.
House will be in order. Now entertain requests for 1-minute speeches. For what purpose does the gentleman of Georgia seek recognition?
Ask unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute and to revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today to recognize and honor the life of Dick Flood, or as many residents of the 1st District knew him, Okefenokee Joe. Flood was a singer, a songwriter, entertainer, environmentalist, and in South Georgia, a local legend. Okefenokee Joe lived in the Okefenokee Swamp for 10 years, learning firsthand about plants and animals in the area. He was well known to Georgia public broadcast viewers for his 1988 documentary, The Joy of Snakes. Flood also hosted the Emmy Award-winning Georgia public broadcast television documentary, Swamp Wise. In the 1950s and 60s, he wrote numerous songs for popular country musicians. This loss will be felt by all of us in the 1st District, and particularly for those that live in and around the Okefenokee Swamp. And on a personal note, when I was dating my wife, we went to see Okefenokee Joe at the Okefenokee Swamp, and I'll never forget that. Our thoughts and prayers are with Mr. Flood and his family. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentleman from New Jersey seek recognition? Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today to criticize the Republican plan to enact a 30% sales tax. This move would cost American families millions of dollars with higher prices for food and household necessities. And it would provide millions to the already wealthiest 1% of Americans. Remember when many of these House Republicans were running for office? They claimed to make inflation and other economic factors their #1 priority. Instead, their priority has been to make it easier to mislead the American people. Stock committees with people who want to overthrow the country and increase prices on everything from gasoline to groceries to punish working class Americans. Thankfully, we have a Democratic Senate to shut down these abuses of power and protect the American people. And with that, Mr. Speaker, I yield back the balance of my time.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Pennsylvania seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, request unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute and to revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I rise today to recognize the Alpha Fire Company and State College and the Logan Fire Company in Bellefonte, as well as their volunteers who collected community donations for the YMCA of Center County's anti-hunger program. Mr. Speaker, these volunteers collected community donations of shelf-stable food totaling more than 24,000 pounds during a 4-year Canuary food drive on Saturday at 4 Center County Wise Market locations. Neighbors Helping Neighbors strengthens our community. As we continue to see rising food costs and record inflation, more and more families are turning to local food banks for food assistance. The idea for Canuary started at the Port Matilda Elementary School, but quickly became a large-scale community effort as volunteers from all over the area started offering to help. Mr. Speaker, as someone who served for decades as a volunteer firefighter, I am happy to see the support they continue to provide to the community. The Canuary food drive will aid in the effort and continues through the remainder of the month with many churches, businesses, schools, offices, and student groups participating. Congratulations on a successful weekend food drive. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I yield back the balance of my time.
For what purpose does the gentleman from California seek recognition?
I ask for unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute and to revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I rise today in honor of Hilda Beatriz McFarland. Hilda was born in National City, California in 1949. She was a pioneer and a trailblazing woman in the 1970s when the Mexican-American community was still relying on demonstration politics. Hilda worked for Housing and Urban Development, and she managed the senior citizen building Horton House in San Diego. She was heavily involved with countless nonprofit organizations where she fought for the poor, the working class, and elderly rights in the county. In 1976, Hilda was the first major contributor to La Gloria Infantil Orphanage in Tijuana, Mexico, and spent her entire life providing services for the orphanage. She was a heroic woman who stood up for education and human rights. She helped her community with the entirety of her heart and soul. With her strong and genuine spirit, she stood up for the disenfranchised, the abandoned, and the injured wherever she was. Hilda was loved by many and influenced so many of us. Her accomplishments and contributions to the community were profound, and she will be sorely missed. Mr. Speaker, with that, I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Indiana seek recognition?
Speaker, I ask unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute and to revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, I rise to recognize a special group of Hoosiers who recently made their hometown very proud. Earlier this month, the Mishawaka Cavemen won the 3A state title wrestling for the 4th time in school history. Their return as state champions was 13 years in the making for the Cavemen, and it wasn't easy. To take home the title, the Cavemen first had to go through the defending state champs, Columbus East, which they did on their way to an exhilarating 43-31 win. As head coach Steve Sandefur said, "You have to wrestle for the guy next to you." I think that's the kind of team-first mindset that every wrestler embraced wholeheartedly. It's a big part of why they and the Mishawaka community are celebrating. And I know it's an attitude that will serve these young men well in their future careers and family lives. And I know one more thing. That approach of rallying to pick up a teammate when they're down is something that our country could use a whole lot more of. So congratulations to Coach Sandifer and his dedicated staff and all your wrestlers on your big win. God bless you, and go Cavemen. I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentleman from North Carolina seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I ask for unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute to revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today on behalf of North Carolina's 1st Congressional District. Right now, the American people are down on the government and tired of the politics of division. When I'm at home in the district, I'm reminded that there is still hope for the future, for the American dream. Mr. Speaker, Eastern North Carolinians are tired of what they see in Washington. They want us, Democrats and Republicans, to do right by them, to find solutions to the most pressing issues being discussed at the dinner table. Mr. Speaker, I'll do just that. I will fight to ensure those who fought to defend our freedoms do not have to fight their country to survive. I will fight to ensure our families and farmers are better connected because they too deserve every resource to thrive. Mr. Speaker, I will fight to ensure our most vulnerable communities have access to affordable health care. We owe it to our communities. We must act together. I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentleman from New York seek recognition?
I ask unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute and to revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Today I rise to bring this body's attention the urgent need to provide tax relief for families in districts like mine. Folks in the Hudson Valley are facing an affordability crisis due to the record inflation, skyrocketing energy costs, and the arbitrary cap on state and local taxes, otherwise known as SALT, placed on residents in states like New York in 2017. It effectively leads to double taxation in a part of our country which already pays among the highest taxes in the nation. In Rockland and Westchester counties, for instance, we pay the highest property taxes in the country, averaging well over $10,000. That's why I've introduced legislation with bipartisan support of my colleagues, Representatives D'Esposito and Sherrill, to begin to address this. The SALT Marriage Penalty Elimination Act would correct the flaw created by the original SALT cap that penalizes married couples filing jointly by lifting their deduction to $20,000 rather than $10,000. This small change would significantly help families in my district and across the country. Ultimately, we need to repeal this arbitrary cap in full, but in the meantime, we can take concrete steps to provide hardworking taxpayers in New York and across the country real tax relief. I yield back my time.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Indiana seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, as a representative for the 1st District of Indiana, I rise today to express my appreciation for the provision in the fiscal year 2023 omnibus bill that support the Great Lakes. As the largest body of fresh water in the world, the Great Lakes and Lake Michigan shoreline in northwest Indiana powered our nation's industrial revolution and steel production capabilities. And today we continue to harness our region's environmental wonders to grow our economy. I'm grateful that the 2023 omnibus bill included robust funds for the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative, my community project funding request to improve our shoreline and Michigan City Harbor, as well as the provisions championed by my friend Rep. Marcy Kaptur to establish the Great Lakes Authority. As we move forward, I look forward to continuing to work through the appropriations process to support the economic strength and environmental protection of Lake Michigan and the Great Lakes. Mr. Speaker, I yield back my time.
For what purpose does the gentlewoman from Texas seek recognition? Without objection, the gentlewoman is recognized for 1 minute.
Speaker, I rise to ask unanimous consent to speak for 1 minute. I rise today to remind my colleagues of the scourge of human trafficking and its impact on children. It is well known that human trafficking is more profitable than drug trafficking. because the vicious cycle of using someone over and over again is both profitable and obviously devastating for that human being. In children and youth, they are used for sex trafficking. It's well known that you are apt to be trafficked from your school, from your primary or secondary school, online. And so I've introduced H.R. 30. I asked my colleagues to join me to Stop Human Trafficking at School Act, joined by my colleague, Congressman McCall, the chair of the Foreign Affairs Committee. We have seen human trafficking go beyond the borders of this nation. It is international. It is dastardly, as said. It is in airports. It's in bathrooms and public transit places. And I want to congratulate the NTZ operation in my own community that has stopped human trafficking at sports arena. Let's protect our children. Join H.R. 30, Stop Human Trafficking at Schools. I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Indiana seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I move that the House do now adjourn.
The question is on the motion to adjourn. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed say no. The ayes have it. The motion is adopted. Accordingly, the House stands adjourned until 10 a.m. tomorrow morning for morning hour debate.